there, steadily gamers, and welcome to this episode of PC Building Fundamentals. Now, I had originally planned for this episode, the next episode in the series to be about motherboards, but I've changed my mind. I actually want to talk about power supplies, and I've got a few reasons for why I want to talk about this next. Power supplies they're one of the components of any, system, no matter for what purpose you plan on using your computer for, it's so vitally important to the entire platform. Yet, it always seems to be an area where many novice builders and even experienced, PC gamers and whatnot that I've seen tend to skimp. They tend to save money in that department, and only seem to be really concerned about looking at, it's got this many watts, it should be absolutely fine. But it's a lot more complicated than that when it comes to power supply selection. Now, I know what you're thinking. It might be an argument to, wait a minute, shouldn't I, decide or choose a power supply after I already have all my components? And, I can see exactly where you're coming from. You need to know what your power draw, your actual use case scenario is going to be, that's for sure. But at the same time, I think as long as you know what kind of level of performance you're looking for, generally the kind of components you're going to be purchasing, there's nothing wrong with, getting that power supply right off the bat, as long as you know, for example, if you're going to be using multiple graphic cards, then if you're using SLI that you need to have a much higher power requirement than just a single graphic card setup. But with that being said, there's some certain tricks and rules to when you search for a power supply. In fact, power supplies are so important. There's a reason I'd quite a while back had written a brief article talking about power supply ratings, because ratings are really important to let you know what you're getting your money out of what you've paid for, basically. At bare minimum, you want to make sure a power supply is 80 plus certified. I tend to recommend for most people, if you're looking for an 80 plus gold, that is going to do the business quite nicely. If we reference the article I'd written, you can see here the differences between the ratings. There's nothing wrong with an 80 plus bronze and 80 plus silver, but honestly, for any type of, if you're interested in overclocking or likewise, you want maximum performance, 80 plus gold is the bare minimum in my mind. I've been using in my main rig a Cooler Master V850. It's an 850 watt power supply with an 80 plus gold rating. But for this build, I'm actually stepping it up to a 80 plus platinum. And again, if you look at the chart really quickly, you can see just the difference between a gold and a platinum. A platinum has a much higher efficiency rating, so that should really do the business for me just fine. One of the other key aspects I mentioned in the article, of course, was sticking to well-known brands. And so actually, I'll be honest, for this build, I'm using a brand that, yes, I have experience with before. My stepdaughter's case is made by Aerocool, and I've used Aerocool products, over the decades, but I've actually never used one of their power supplies. So this is a bit of a learning experience for me. I'm hoping that the performance is going to be okay, and it's going to sound horrible, but the only reason that I really selected this power supply was so I could match it with the fans that Aerocool offers. Because this is indeed an RGB ready power supply, and so I want the entire build to sync up, but it was very important to me to have the fans actually be the exact same color. I didn't want this mismatch of the fans looking, the power supply fan looking extremely out of place. So yes, I've actually selected this power supply purely for aesthetic reasons. But that being said, we say aesthetic reasons, but when we look at the stats of this, which I'm going to have to turn around here, they're actually quite impressive. They're using high quality Japanese capacitors, which in most, high level, top notch PSUs, that is something that they tend to go with, definitely something to look for. And one of the nicest features is because of this, the power efficiency of this PSU, the fan basically operates in silent mode. You can see there's a fan curve here, and the fans will only actually spin up once the power supply reaches a 60% load. Now again, if you look at my article, I mentioned how the sweet spot for power supplies where you want to really kind of live is between that 50% and 75% range. That is where your PSU will be working at its most efficient. And so that's again why I selected 850 watts. That is going to be more than enough if I want to upgrade in the future, do install more power hungry hardware. But for right now, based off my computations, which again, some great calculators out there online, this should be operating, if it's at 100% load, it shouldn't be drawing 850 watts. It should be, in between that 50 to 75% range. But yeah, so, it looks like a decent power supply, but let's go ahead and get it out of its box, shall we? Okay, so now that we've took the sleeving off, we can see we're left with just a plain cardboard box. Let the tripod there. But then once we open it, we're of course greeted with the power supply user's manual. Now from Aircool, this is part of their Project 7 product line, which the Project 7 is actually really cool. It's some very nice looking equipment they make. They've got cases, of course, fans. They've even got things like beanbag chairs and whatnot. So it kind of matches with that whole lineup. I'm a firm believer in reading instructions. So, anytime you get a component, you should, of course, always look at the manual just to kind of make sure that there's, nothing different, vastly different from, maybe other components that you've had in the past, because it can happen sometimes. There might be a switch on here that you may overlook, because some power supplies you can actually select the voltage, whereas most the decent of the modern ones actually have a auto voltage capability where they will actually alter your voltage accordingly. Now let me just straighten it up a little bit. Right, so once we've got it opened, we can see we've got two main components here. This will be the little bag that will have all of the cables. Now this is one of the things which may also actually affect your purchasing decisions. Of course, this is the power plug for over here in the UK. We use these big meaty 3-prong ones, but of course, because we have a much higher voltage than North America. But the cables for this, I'll be honest, I'm not that impressed. For example, in the Cooler Master series cases and a lot of the Corsairs, you'll get braided cables. Whereas for Aerocool, we have not got braided cables. Instead, we've got just these kind of generic, normal. Now they are flat, so that is a nice feature. That helps for cable routing. But they are just flat plastic cables. So initially, once we put it together and we start get the components on the build, it's not going to be the prettiest of things. But that being said, we'll fix that later down the line. So we shall. Now if I just get those out of the way. Well, it's quite handy. It's given us some zip ties, which I've got thousands of those anyway, but also some Velcro things which are quite handy. So the next bag is of course the power supply itself. So if we have a look at this, I'm quite happy with this power supply. I'm finding it quite aesthetically pleasing. As you can see, that's where of course the power goes, simple on off switch. There's no kind of voltage adjustment, it does it automatically. And then you can see there's a little warning here, fanless mode. This fan will only spin at heavier loads. And there's the fan in all its glory. I'm liking this kind of mesh build as well to it. It's very muted. A lot of power supplies have a really big ugly sticker, lots of things going on, but not here on the AeroCool Project 7. It's just very nice and muted, very, doesn't draw too much attention. That's exactly what I want. I want this to not draw too much attention, but obviously the fan, will have a bit of color going on when we sync everything up. Now, this is what I want to talk about when it comes to power supplies, is of course all your connectivity and the numbers here. These are so important because there's a big debate going around about your 12-volt rail, right? Whether having a single or a multiple is better, and it would take ages to go into that argument, I'll be honest with you. This is a single 12-volt rail. Now, even so, we're mainly concerned about wattage. It's worth understanding that wattage is basically just volts multiplied by amps. Amp or amperage is your actual draw. Amperage is a unit of measurement, the speed that electrons travel past a certain point. Anyway, enough of the science class. Amperage is really, really important because, when you think of that movie, right, Apollo 13, and remember they were trying to get the power draw down below a certain amount of amps. This is really important. A lot of cheaper power supplies will have quite a low amp rating. Now, it's worth paying attention. The 12-volt rail, that is where most of our components are going to be drawing power from. Our video card, the CPU, most of the components in a build will be basically adding up to this amp draw on the 12-volt rail. But there are other components that will tap into the 5-volt and sometimes 3.3. The 5-volt prime example is RGB, and a lot of fans are run at 12-volt. But then likewise, you also have 12-volt RGB. When we look at the motherboard later down the line, you'll see what I mean. Most motherboards which have RGB, capability, have the headers for them, have both RGB 12-volt and RGB 5-volt. So it's worth paying attention to this because you can quite easily overload your system by plugging in too many headers, too many fans, and likewise when it comes to USB devices. USB devices are also drawing amperage. You plug in your phone to charge it, it will be charging at a certain rate. So that's why it's important to look and make sure you have a nice high rating here. As you can see, if we do the math, 12 by multiplied by 70 does indeed equal 840. Now, whether or not this delivers 840 watts on the 12-volt rail is debatable, but to keep it simple, I see why they've just done that math. And it's the same here, 5 times 20, 3.3 times 20. When you add those together, you're looking at a max combined output there of 120 watts. So that's why they've rated this at an 850 watt power supply. But yeah, it's just something to note. With what you'll have happen if you have a power supply with multiple 12-volt rails, these numbers will be lower. But what ends up happening is you could have components on different rails. Now, it's not important to understand the why, you would want to do that. It's to do with short circuit protection, if we're honest. If I try to draw more than 70 amps on this power, that 12-volt rail, the chances are this is going to shut off to try to protect itself. In theory, sometimes they don't, and ends up, things inside end up blowing up, or likewise, everything on the 12-volt rail gets completely destroyed. So it's important to look at these specs. Don't get just blown away by how many watts a power supply has. Also make sure you've got good amperage here, because what you might end up finding is you could get a cheap 850 watt power supply that maybe only has, a really low number here, but what they've done is they've upped the amperage on the other rails to then make the grand total still this number, but just where it's got it from is in different places. So it's just something to be mindful for. But of course, this is a power supply that's got a nice modular setup, so that way you can, just install the cables that you need. and it should work quite well. Now, as previously mentioned, I'm using quite a radically different case. It's a chassis more than a case, and it's quite unconventional. And one of the things that this means is that the power supply itself is going to be in quite a different position than in most conventional cases. So what I'm going to be doing for this case is I'm going to be having the power supply down here. If I can slide this in, I might actually have to take that bracket off. Yeah, that's looking like it's going to be better if I just take that bracket off and attach it once I've got the power supply in position. So yes, with this case, this is obviously the way it needs to be mounted. If you were using a traditional case, how you mount it is really going to depend on a lot of factors. If you're using a case that has, a basement in it, and by that I mean, a shroud that covers the entire power supply, so it effectively makes a basement in the bottom, the chances are you're going to want to have it installed with the fan down. So that way it acts as an intake. That type of case will probably have an opening at the bottom with a filter. And that way it'll draw cool air in from the bottom and exhaust it out the back. But in some use case scenarios, it actually makes sense to have your power supply installed with the fan up. Again, depending on the composition of your case and what type of thermals you are experiencing. But in our use case scenario, we want it with the fan sticking out. So regardless of what case you have, you should have some type of power supply bracket. So for this case, for example, this is ours, and it's quite snug. Very snug. So if we just get that in place, and now we should see where the holes will line up to attach this mounting bracket to the power supply itself. So we've got one up here, one down here, one over in the corner, and one up there. So let's see where the screws for that are hiding. It gave us handy little thumb screws. That's a nice little feature. Excuse me, I'm just opening up the bag here. I think has it given us options? Yes, indeed, it's given us options. So we can either utilize these thumb screws for a quick release if we wish, or we've got some more traditional lower profile screws. So I think what I'm going to do, since I don't plan on removing this once I've got it installed, is I'm going to put the thumb screws away. At least that's the plan. And we're going to use these little ones here. The actual installation is going to vary depending on your case, but most decent quality cases are going to have some kind of removable bracket. And then how the bracket itself will attach to your case, it varies by manufacturer. Some have quick release capabilities, others do not. Some are in there fairly securely, semi-permanently. But then a lot of the cheaper cases won't actually even have this removable bracket. They'll just attach directly to the frame of the case, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just makes it quite handy when you do have a separate bracket like this. Let me just get you screwed in. And last one. Right, now we can start attaching this bad boy to the case itself. So in this case I have some nice little slots here to help guide me. And we can find the hole. I'm usually quite good at that. There we go. Got her in. So we'll grab our trusty screwdriver. Get that plumbed in. I'm not going to tighten it all the way at the moment because I want to get this other bracket over, because we need to have a look and see what holes am I going to use here. It looks like the, if I go, let's see, to this one here, that's just right on the edge. So I think I'd much rather bring it back one. Yeah, that looks a lot better. That's going to be nice and secure. And you can see how dusty this arm is. This case has unfortunately just been sitting around because I haven't done anything with it yet. I keep delaying the purchase of components, especially with Black Friday coming up. You know, you never know. There might be decent deals to be had. Right, so let's go ahead and get this support bracket tightened in. Maybe. It would help if it actually, there we go. Right, okay, I got to start. That's what I wanted. Just wanted to get it started so that way the screw is actually securely in, and do the same at the bottom. There we go. And now, give it a good tighten. Don't want to over torque it. If you are extremely concerned about how tight to tighten your screws and your nuts, you could use a torque screwdriver of some kind. But honestly, as long as you're not going crazy and tightening things too much, you should be fine. Just a nice firm, you know, turn. Get it in nice and tight. There we go. So our first component is now on our case, our power supply. You know, what's good about a high quality case like this is, of course, the flexibility it gives you for cable routing. Now, you know, as I said, this case, I mean, this power supply, it doesn't have the prettiest of cables. You know, they are just black and flat. But what's good about this case is you're only going to see a little bit of these down here, and then it's immediately going through this routing cable, you know, the grommet here, and then it will be unseen. Now, sure, okay, on the other side of things, if I just twist this up, you know, obviously when it comes out, yeah, we're going to have an unsightly mess once it connects into the motherboard. But as you'll see later, we have a way to fix that. Initially, we will just be using these, but later down the line, you know, we're going to make this rig look nice and pretty. But right, so, you know, the power supply is now connected. Well, say connected, it's mounted. We still don't have any components hooked up to it. And there's no way to test it. You know, for all I know, this could be a dud component, but from everything I've seen, you know, from the limited reviews and also videos of this PSU in action, it does look like a good bit of kit. And of course, like I said, with the built-in RGB function, it's going to allow me to sync up perfectly once I get these fans installed over here. There's other components that'll be going there, but yeah, I think it's going to look quite nice, matching, you know, tying those things together. And of course, if there is something wrong with this power supply, AeroCool offers a 7-year warranty, which is just fantastic. But anyway, that will do it for this episode of PC Building Fundamentals. You know, when you're choosing a power supply, just stick to brands that people know of. Stick to decent brands. If you have any doubts, get involved in the internet. Ask people. Go on forums. As always, you can stop by the Scholarly Gamers Discord and ask the question, hey, I'm looking at this power supply and this power supply. Can someone, help me choose, help me decide? And, no doubt someone will be able to give you an idea. And likewise, if you're playing PC Building Simulator, there's some great tools in that as well, where you can look and see the difference that power supplies will make, especially when you get into the realm of overclocking. Because that's when you soon discover that not all power supplies are created equal. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time on PC Building Fundamentals.